What's up, everybody? This is Dante Fortson here with Nephilim Giants Part 1, The Days of Noah. The Days of Noah becomes important because it's a huge portion of Bible prophecy related to the end times. I know a lot of us who identify as Israelites, we focus on the 400 years, we focus on the awakening, and we focus on everything surrounding that. And yet, we often miss a major portion of prophecy if we do not talk about the days of Noah, the Nephilim, the fallen angels, and everything that was going on in those days. So we're going to talk about that today. So quick introduction. Why is this important? I know some of you are thinking probably, why is it important that we even know about the days of Noah that happened back then and it has no relevance now? It's a cool Bible story, but we need to focus on what's going on now. And this is why this is relevant right now. So if you're studying the books of Exodus through 2nd Chronicles, this is going to provide context for some of the events that happen in the books of Exodus all the way through 2nd Chronicles. It provides context for what we call mythology. It provides context for modern day beliefs. So some of the stuff you see going on today, if you have not studied this before, it won't make sense. It seems like it comes out of nowhere, but when you understand what was going on in the days of Noah, it puts everything into context, and you can look at some of the stuff today and say, oh yeah, that's where that come from. So those of you who are familiar with Chuck Missler, you've probably been through some of this study, and some of it's going to be familiar and a lot of it's going to be new because I took mine a little bit further than he went with it. So it provides a blueprint for several end times prophecies. And finally, it provides a reference point for future supernatural Bible studies. So I had to do this one because once we get into angelology and demonology, I'm going to end up pointing back to some of the occurrences from this study to make sense of future studies. Some of you guys know how I do. I like to lay the foundation first and then build upon the foundation, kind of like I did with the Addressing the Evidence series. If you have not watched that series, go watch that series. All right, so there are two theories when it comes to the days of Noah. The first one is the Sethite theory, which I've gone over in a separate video. The link is in the description, or you can really just find it on my page. The Lines of Seth, A Brief History of Heresy. All right, so let's talk about as the days of Noah were. Today, the view I'm going to be presenting is the older view. It is not the Sethite view. It is not accepted by a lot of people, especially in the traditional Christian church. Very few Israelites I've heard have touched on this. I know Teo Ministries has touched on this in their Ancient World series, which is very, very good. I recommend going to watch that series if you are interested in a lot of supernatural stuff. So if we go back to the story of Noah and start to read in depth on what's going on in the story of Noah, you will find that most Christians and Israelites who came out of Eurocentric Christianity believed that Noah's flood was all about bad people. The world got so bad that God sent a flood, wiped it out, and started over. But there's a much deeper issue here. And I know some of you are going to say, yeah, the Nephilim were on the earth. It's even deeper than that. And we're going to go beyond the Nephilim today. So if you're familiar with the Nephilim, get ready to add a bunch more to your paradigm that you probably may not have encountered before. So we're going to start reading Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. And it came to pass when men began to multiply upon the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, but for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. All right. So one of the things that we're going to encounter in most basic teachings on this is they use this to say, well, there's giants, but the giants were born from humans, as covered in the Sethite theory. They're going to say the sons of Seth got with the daughters of Cain, and they produced these giants, and they weren't supposed to mix, and God had told them not to mix, and the world became evil, and so God destroyed the world. There's more to it, so we're going to keep going. So the sons of God, we're going to Genesis 6:4. show you where I'm coming from right here. We're going to break down this verse right here. Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. There are some people that try to separate the giants from the children that were born to the sons of God and daughters of men. They're saying, well, it's just saying there were giants in the earth in those days, but it's not. They say it's not connected to the sons of God and daughters of men, and that's not true. And we're going to see why. So, first of all, the giants are the Nephilim. There were Nephilim in the earth in those days. Nephilim, we'll come back to them. The sons of Yahweh are Elohim, the wickedness Elohim, the sons of God. Wickedness Elohim, sons of God. You'll see it translated as sons of the gods in some places, but it's the sons of God. So the B'nai Elohim, the wickedness Elohim, we're looking for a specific phrase here. Bene Elohim, Elohim. Now, it does not work if you try to apply this terminology to other places in Scripture. This is a very specific terminology used, and I'm going to show you why it's important to understand the specific terminology, because you'll run into people who are so adamant that this did not happen that they'll try to use other scriptures to say, see, these aren't angels here, and it's used, and that's not the case. It's only found 6 times in Scripture. It's found twice in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1-4. It's found once in Job 1:6, once in Job 2:1, once in Job 38:7, and once in Daniel 3:25. It is in the singular Aramaic. And Nebuchadnezzar refers to the man in the fire as an angel. So we're gonna look at those examples, all of them except for one, because Job 1:6 and Job 2:1 are basically the same exact verse in wording. So we only need to really look at one of those. So starting in the book of Job. Now there was a day, this is Job 1:6 and 7. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. So now Satan is among these sons of God who come to present themselves before the Lord. Understand that even with the temple and the tabernacle, they were never referred to as the sons of God coming to present themselves before the Lord. And the high priest was the only one allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. So here we see a different class of beings, the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, or the wickedness Elohim, coming, and Satan is among them. Now, he's not necessarily one of them, even though they're all angels. When we get into angelology, we'll talk about how Satan is referred to as a cherub, a different rank of angel than the sons of God. And same thing in Job 2:1. So now we're giving a time frame in Job 38:7. We'll start at verse 6. But in Job 38:7, this is the Most High telling Job, or asking Job questions about the creation. Like, where were you when I was doing all this creation of the earth? And in we'll start at verse 38, verse 6. Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened, or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Now, notice it's a question. Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? ? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. So this is indicating that the cornerstone was being laid as the morning stars were singing, and the sons of God were shouting for joy. This is talking about the creation of the earth. Humans were not around yet. And again, it used the phrase B'nai Elohim, or wickedness Elohim. So it's not talking about human beings when that phrase is used. So far we've seen Satan come among them twice, and now we've seen that they were present at the creation of the earth. In the book of Daniel, this is where the 3 Hebrew boys get tossed into the fiery furnace, and Nebuchadnezzar sees a fourth. We're going to read Daniel chapter 3, verses 24-25. We're going to tie all this together. If it seems like I'm moving kind of fast through it, I'm going to slow it down and bring it back. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto the counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. Now, depending on what version you're reading, it may say the form of the fourth is like a son of God. But again, it uses the singular. And then later on, if you continue reading Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar says the Lord sent his angel. Nebuchadnezzar calls him outright an angel. So what we are dealing with in Genesis 6:1-4 are angels that see women, human women, and they take them to wife and they have sex with them and they produce hybrid giants known as the Nephilim. So we're going to get into that and understand why the word giant even appears in our Bible instead of the word Nephilim.
The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth.
Are very difficult to simply just dismiss because there's just too much starting to make sense as certain events unfold.
We know for a fact that there were giants in the land of Canaan after the flood. Where did they come from? The book of Enoch and the book of the giants give very good information about the giants and the fallen angels they sprung for, and who their descendants are.
The Book of Giants is an apocrypha Hebrew book expanding a narrative in the Bible. Its discovery at Qumran dates the text's creation to before the 2nd century BC. The Book of Giants is thought to have been based on the Book of Enoch, a pseudepigraphical Hebraic work from the 3rd century BC, itself based on Genesis 6:1-4 concerning the Nephilim, which, in the Enoch version, are the offspring of fallen angels. Aramaic fragments, along with other fragments from the Book of Enoch, were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. The text relates how some giants, named Oya, Ahaya, and Mahweh, sons of the fallen angels, have some dreams that foresee the biblical flood. The Book of Giants, Fragment J, verses 27. Thereupon the giants began to kill each other and to abduct their wives. The creatures too began to kill each other. They chose beautiful women and demanded them in marriage. So did all carried off severally. They were subjected to tasks and services. And they from each city, and were ordered to serve the Messenians of Messenia, which was a region of Greece.
The first Messenian War was a war between Messenia and Sparta. It took place around 754 BC. In 480 BC, Leonidas, Sparta, sacrifices 300 Spartan soldiers at the Battle of Thermopylae so the main forces can escape the Persians. This is where we get the movie 300 from. Of course, they made a lot of changes to the original story. Now, why is this so important? These early nations were all descendants of fallen angels, which the Nephilim sprang forth from.
Most authors have not taken into account that this Nephilim and their children the Eliud could reproduce. This explains some of the strangeness of ancient mythology. Moreover, perhaps were humanoids, such as the Neanderthals came from, and why they are not of the same DNA branch as modern humans out of Africa. However, Neanderthals were not the only hominin species that humans mated with. According to a new study, East Asian and European populations share genes with the Neanderthal. Also, East Asians share genes with the mysterious archaic hominin species that lived in Siberia, the Denisovians, that are close cousin to the Neanderthal.
And the entire translation process continues to prove that these were not the sons of Seth, even though some people want to hold on to that idea. Go to Wikipedia and type in, or go to Google and type in Jewish ranks of angels. You don't have to use Wikipedia. These examples, 4 of them I'm going to give you, come from Wikipedia. But type in Jewish ranks of angels, and you will see Maimonides, for example, has 10, and you see the Malach-im. The I-M is plural. Malachim. Malach is singular. That's why it says EmmaNYAH'el, the angel of the Lord. He was alone. Malachim Yahweh would have meant it was many angels of the Lord. So Malachim, the messenger angels, and then you have the B'nai Elohim, or the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of the godly beings, or the sons of God. So we see here that both can be true. Yes, angels can be called Malach, but there are multiple ranks. We have the B'nai Ha-Elohim, and we also have other ones you are familiar with. Cherubim, which are mentioned in the Bible, and the seraphim, which are mentioned in the Bible. So there's at least 4 different ranks of angels that you're familiar with right from the Bible. So Malach, yes, they can be angels, and cherubim can be angels, and seraphim can be angels, and B'nai Ha-Elohim can be angels. These are different ranks and different jobs. We see here in the Zohar, same thing. The Malachim are ranked at number 1, but the B'nai Ha-Elohim are ranked at lower, at number 9. Jacob Nazir, he separates them out as well. Malachim is at number 8. B'nai Elohim is at number 9. We see a pattern that the B'nai Ha-Elohim are very low until we come here and they're up a little bit higher with Abraham ben Isaac. He puts the B'nai Elohim at 3 and he puts the Malachim at 4. And he's the only one that lists the B'nai Elohim over the Malachim, if you're paying attention to that. So we see that outside sources, outside of the Bible, say, okay, Malachim are angels and the B'nai Elohim are indeed angels. Now, these are just opinions, but we will see that this becomes consistent the more we start to dig into the sources. People say, okay, yes, these are angels. Where it becomes inconsistent, we'll get to that. I don't want to jump ahead of myself. So let's talk about the book of Enoch. Not scripture, in my opinion, because it has not been handled with the care of the 66 books we call the canon or the Bible. But it is a good historical reference because it was put together in 200 BC and it was assembled from older beliefs that previously existed. So this is a very old belief system that these were angels and not human people. The sons of God were not human. And while we're on the subject, I know that there are some people that say, well, we shouldn't go outside the Bible to look for history. That makes no sense because we go outside the Bible to look at every other bit of history. And people kept historical records during Bible times that were not Israelites. And so it is by these records that we know what's going on around the rest of the world, where we can say, okay, this is similar and this is similar. Let's see how they fit together. Now, the book of Enoch is, to me, a great historical perspective to show you that people did indeed believe this. So these watchers were sent to watch over humankind. They started to lust after human women. And so it was 200 of them. And they're going to make a pact to go down and take these women and have sex with these women. So this is where the book of Enoch, where I'm picking up with the book of Enoch. And some Jaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, let us all swear an oath and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. So they swore an oath to do it. They followed through. They did it. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took wives of all which they chose. Consistent. And it said, and there were giants on earth in those days. So they bare to them those children, right? This is from Genesis. I'm paraphrasing. So now let's see what the book of Enoch continues to say. And they became pregnant, referring to the women. And they bare great giants whose height was 300 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. So there's a lot going on here that you didn't see in the Bible. You have cannibalism. And it's very vague. It says they begin to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish. It doesn't say what that sin is. But we're gonna uncover that, because the more we start to dig, the more specific of what they were doing it's going to get. And when I say very, very specific, I'm going to tie it to something that happened in 2020. So they start to engage in cannibalism and drink blood and eat human flesh and sin against all of creation. So the Watchers, I mentioned the Watchers, you find them in the book of Daniel, but I Googled the word Watchers, and this is the info box that popped up from Wikipedia. In the book of Enoch, the Watchers are angels dispatched to earth to watch over the humans. They soon begin to lust for human women, and at the prodding of their leader EmαNYAH'el, defect in mass to illicitly instruct humanity and procreate among them. So we see that even the entry on Wikipedia says these were angels, a specific group of angels. Now, that's not proof of anything, but let's look at the book of Jubilees. It was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, just like the book of Enoch. The book of Jubilees is called the Little Genesis, and it does give a little more in-depth commentary on the events in Genesis. The book of Jubilees, chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. And pay attention to how much more in depth, more information we start to get as we continue to dig. It adds on and adds on and adds on, not to the story, but it adds on to the clarity of the words in Genesis. And it came to pass when the children of men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the angels of God saw them on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful to look upon, and they took themselves wives of all whom they chose, and they bare unto them sons, and they were giants. So there's no confusion there in the Little Genesis. It says straightforward that these angels took human women and they had giant sons. Very straightforward and clear. Verse 2, and lawlessness increased in the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way alike, men and cattle and beast and birds and everything that walks on the earth. Remember, the giants began to sin against men and beast and cattle and birds. All of them corrupted their ways and their orders, and they began to devour each other, and lawlessness increased on the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of all men was thus evil continually. So they corrupted their orders. It means they didn't stay within the natural order. Cats were messing with dogs, and dogs were messing with, whatever else was out there. So you had cross species crossing. Now you might say that sounds crazy. That's not possible, but we're going to keep reading. This is one of the earliest mentions of genetic crossing that we have. And when I say earliest, not the earliest written, but the reference to the earliest time frame before Noah's flood. It's a reference to genetic crossing. Nothing was staying in its orders. They had corrupted their ways and their orders. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. Notice how this word corrupt is going to keep getting used in almost every text that we see. And all flesh had corrupted its orders, and all that were upon the earth had wrought all manner of evil before his eyes. And he said he would destroy man and all flesh upon the face of the earth, which he had created. But Noah found grace before the eyes of the Lord. All right, so we have that. Noah finds grace, just like he does in the book of Genesis. Everything is consistent so far. And against the angels, and now here we're going to get the punishment of the angels. We don't get this in the book of Genesis. And against the angels whom he had sent upon the earth, he was exceedingly wroth, and he gave commandments to root them out of all their dominion. And he bade us to bind them in the depths of the earth. And behold, they are bound in the midst of them and are kept separate. So they are bound in the midst of the earth, and they are kept separate. Now, this is important because Jubilees only gives us a little bit of this information. He tells us they're bound in the depths of the earth. Let's look here. We see before and after the flood, right? So we're going to come to Genesis 6, verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. That is a conjunction. It joins these two thoughts together. In those days and also after that. There's no separate explanation. They are joined together by the word and. It is a conjunction. I hope we're on the same page. So now when we get the explanation, it refers to both. When the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. When were the giants on the earth? In those days and also after that. Period. Not period in the sentence, but that's what it says. A conjunction. There's no arguing with that. There's a conjunction. Let's keep going. We can look at a few more just in context. Whenever the sons of God came into the daughters of men. Wherever the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. So anyway, if we plug those words in, we start to get a different context. And now it starts to make sense why we see hybrids or Nephilim in Numbers 13:33 in the promised land. Because after these angels did what they did, there's the punishment. Jubilees told us they are bound in the earth. And you will get false teachers that say, well, the other angels saw this and they were so scared that they would never do it again. Even though that's not in scripture, that's completely fabricated. But what we see throughout history is other angels doing this. We have records of the gods, lowercase g, who are, in my opinion, angels that were mistaken for gods because they did not have the lens, the spiritual lens of the Bible or scripture to tell them that these are angels and not gods, as in capital G, but these are angels, lowercase g gods that are doing this. And they're not to be worshiped because they're doing the wrong thing. And if you continue to get into some of this stuff, once we get into angelology, we'll talk about it more. But every culture reports the wrongdoings of their gods with the lowercase g. They rape, they enslave, and they basically destroy mankind. And we're going to see that this is what they do. So wouldn't this result in hybrid children? And that's a valid question. So people ask that question. They'll say, okay, well, if these angels had sex with humans, what were the Nephilim? Weren't they hybrids? These giants, they were hybrids. And the answer is yes. We have the stories of the Nephilim. And so we're going to come right back to Genesis 6. Genesis 6, we're going to start at verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So it tells us, it gives us enough information about these giants in Genesis 6. We have a ton of information up to this point. We're going to get further into the chapter in a minute, but it tells us that they were the sons of angels. It tells us they were mighty men, and it tells us they were men of renown. But what does that word renown mean? We're going to break down all of these. So the word Nephilim right here, the word Nephilim, 5303. So you can see 5303 Nephilim. It means giants, the names of two peoples, one before the flood and one after the flood. Giants on the earth in those days and also after that. You're going to have the Nephilim in Genesis 6, and then in Numbers 13:33, they're going to encounter the Nephilim again, which is why they were so scared to go in, and only Joshua and Caleb wanted to go in. Now, if you didn't understand that passage before in the book of Numbers, remember I told you it's going to be key to understanding Exodus through 2 Samuel. If you don't understand why these people were so frightened, why 10 of the 12 spies were so frightened because they look like grasshoppers in the sight of the Nephilim, is because this is the history. Nephilim were cannibals. Remember they said the land eateth up the inhabitants thereof. This is a reference to the cannibalism going on that we read about in the book of Jasher. We're going to read about it in the book of Enoch. So now you have some context as to what's going on. These were giant cannibals that they wanted to go in and fight. Well, Joshua and Caleb wanted to go in and fight. Nobody else wanted to go fight. Now, how we get the word giants into our Bible, from Nephilim to giants. There's an in-between phase, the LXX or the Greek Septuagint. When they had to translate the Old Testament into Greek, they translated the word Nephilim into gigantes. Now remember, they're translating it into Greek so people who speak Greek can read these words. And the Greeks associated the gigantes with mythological giants, which means that the people translating the Bible saw that word Nephilim and associated and said, what's the closest thing we can do? We can associate it with the gigantes so they get the idea that these are supernatural giants. And then later on, you're going to have the Titans as well, which are giants. Well, actually not later on, but the Titans were, I believe, prior to the giants, but the Titans are giants. The Titans were prior to the gigantes. Let me say it that way. The gigantes were one set of giants and the Titans were another set of giants that were considered gods. But they translated into gigantes, which means earthborn. And that right there is going to be important because earthborn is going to be referenced again in another book. So it says the gigantes were a tribe of 100 giants born of the earth goddess Gaia. According to some, she was impregnated by the blood of the castrated sky god Uranus. At the urging of Gaia, the gigantes waged war on the gods and were destroyed in the ensuing battle. You will find that that the hybrid offspring of the angels and the gods in different stories, they never get along. That is a consistent theme through biblical related stories, the ones outside of the Bible that are biblically linked, and then the outright mythologies of other cultures. The gods and their children did not get along. It says, at the urging of Gaia, the Gigantes waged war on the gods and were destroyed in the ensuing battle. The most famous of the combatants was Enceladus, who was buried by Athena beneath Mount Etna, Polybotes, who was crushed by the island cast by Poseidon, and Porphyrion, who was slain by Zeus and Heracles, or as you know him, Hercules probably, when he attempted to violate the goddess Hera. The giants were depicted as either spear-wielding hoplite warriors in armor or primitive clothed in animal skins and armed with rocks and flaming brands. In scripture and mosaic art, they were usually depicted with the tails of serpents in place of legs. Now, that's not the usual depiction, but it is a depiction. Is that you'll have these giants that are hybrid with snakes and stuff. This is going to be important because we're going to come back to this. This stuff sounds like, hey, this is just mythology. He's just teaching us mythology. But no, I'm not teaching you mythology. I'm teaching you modern science. Some of you just don't know it yet. So the men of renown. Right here it says, became the mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So let's look up the word renown. I Googled the word renown. It says the condition of being known or talked about by many people, fame. So these children became famous, right? So if the words of the scripture is true, let's give you two scenarios. If these were the sons of Seth and Cain, the sons produced from the Sethite men marrying the women of Cain, we should have famous sons of Seth and daughters of Cain combos. We should know of them. They should be famous, right? But if I'm right and the angels, the hybrids, were what were produced in Genesis, we should have tales of famous hybrids. Now, what we know is that the flood came and they wiped out all of the sons of Seth. So they couldn't have been that righteous. Wipes out all the hybrids. So we have no way to tell if they were famous during that time. However, we have the Ha-Gibborim. We're gonna come back to the fame in just a second. We have the Ha-Gibborim. It says they were strong and mighty. They were, let me go back for a second. They were mighty men. That's the word Ha-Gibborim here. Strong, mighty. So let's keep going. So did this only happen in the Bible? And of course not. I've been showing you that it's not only in the Bible, but it's in the book of Enoch. It's in the book of Jubilees. It's in Greek mythology. It's in Egyptian mythology. It's in Roman mythology. It's in modern mythology. And I put the word mythology in quotation marks because that's what people like to call it when they don't research it and they don't understand it, instead of referring to it as what it is. It's history. Now I want to show you something. Let's talk about the offspring, the heroes and the Nephilim. So the Nephilim are in the Bible and the heroes are going to be outside of the Bible. They're referred to as the heroes. You have the Gigantes, the earthborn. This actually kind of springs over into both. I put that there because we have the Septuagint version of the Bible does contain the Greek mythological Gigantes in there, translated from the word Nephilim, which is how we got the word giants in our Bible. So there are angel-human hybrids in the Bible, and they are usually giants with supernatural strength. They vary in sizes from Goliath up to Og and bigger than that. But in the pagan cultures, they are god-human hybrids instead of angel-human hybrids. They're not always giants, but always had supernatural abilities. So you're starting to see a pattern here. That this stuff is consistent when you start to look around and say, hey, what was going on in the ancient world that everybody was writing this stuff? So let's talk about it. And I said, if I'm right, we should be able to find hybrids in history that are famous and we know who they are. We don't know any sons of Seth that any offspring from the sons of Seth and daughters of Cain that are famous. You can't name one, not even in the Bible. It says they became famous. So if they were famous, they would have at least been mentioned at least once. But we don't find that. We have Goliath in the Bible. He comes from the Nephilim. He's born to the giant in Gath. And remember, I said this is key to understanding Exodus through 2 Samuel. So if you want to know how Goliath and his 4 brothers and their fathers, 6 of them ended up in Gath to fight, or you ended up fighting David. They're from Gath. You have to go back and read the book of Joshua, where when they invaded, some of the giants fled. But you have to go back and read the book of Numbers to understand what they were up against. They were up against the Nephilim. And in order to understand who the Nephilim are, you have to go back to the days of Noah. And to understand what's going to be coming up, the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So you have Goliath, who was a famous hybrid. You have Gilgamesh, who was part man, part God. And you can see that this statue of Gilgamesh shows him holding a lion in his arms, like it's a cat. This is a full lion. You see the mane? This is a lion. He's holding it like a baby cat. You have Hercules from the Greek myths. Gilgamesh is from Sumer. And if you know the story of Gilgamesh, people say, well, the Bible copied the flood story from Gilgamesh. No. Gilgamesh in the book of, in his book, he goes and looks for Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood, aka Noah. He wants to find the secret of immortality because him and his sons survived the flood, and he wants to know how he did it. You have to go read this stuff for yourself, because the most churches that many of us came out of, they will tell you not to even look at this stuff because it's mythology. We don't need to bother with it. But there's a story of a hybrid out there going to look for the survivor of the flood so that he can learn how he survived the flood, or the secret of immortality. And when he finds Utnapishtim won't tell him. It makes sense that Noah wouldn't tell a hybrid how he survived the flood. So let's talk about the perfection of Noah. See, it gets deeper in Genesis than just the surface level text. Especially if you come from a church with surface level text, you're not going to dive into a lot of this stuff. Noah's perfection is alluded to his physical perfection. And I'm going to show you right now. Because you'll get people telling you, well, Noah was perfect and just, and that meant Noah was righteous, and that's all there is to it. But that's not true. So we're going to Genesis 6:5 through 10. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Didn't we see that before in the book of Jubilees? So it's consistent. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. The text indicates that it was physically painful to God to see what was going on. Go to BibleHub.com, type in Genesis 6:6, and click interlinear and click the word grieved. It talks about a physical pain. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and the creeping things and the fowl of the air, for it repenteth me that I made them. Why would God destroy all of the animals? The same reason when you see them go into the promised land and he tells them to destroy every man, woman, child, and animal of certain tribes. They were tainted. So like I said, you have to understand what was going on in the days of Noah to catch some of the stuff going on in Exodus through 2 Samuel. So he's grieved that he'd made mankind. What did the book of Enoch say? They started to sin against the animals. What did the book of Jasher say? They started to experiment on the animals. What did the book of Jubilees say? They started to tamper with the animals, and they weren't in their orders anymore. Everything was being tampered with. That's why God is going to wipe out all flesh, and he commands them to take two of certain animals. It may not have been a bunch of animals to take because they were being tampered with. It says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. It says, these are the generations of Noah, and Noah was a just man and perfect in his generation, and Noah walked with God, and Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. My position is that Noah was morally just and physically perfect. Not like he was the perfect person, but he was untainted by the stuff that was going on around him. He wasn't mixed with anything. Nobody had tampered with his genetics. That's my belief. And if my belief is true, we should be able to find more evidence of that. However, if it's only about morality, which I don't disagree with, I believe Noah was just and he was morally just. So I'm not going to argue against that. However, I believe there's more to it. And if I'm incorrect, we shouldn't be able to find anything to support what I'm saying. Nothing at all. But if we break down Genesis 6:9, we see that it's interesting how the words are used. Noah was a just man and righteous. Right here, righteous, 662, this is going to be Sadiq, and Tamim. He was righteous and blameless. Look how Tamim is translated, 8549. Noah was righteous and blameless. Sadiq and Tamim, right? So now most people stop there and say, okay, well, that proves that Noah was righteous and there's nothing else going on. So let's look at the word Tamim real quick. 8549, Tamim, 8549. Complete, sound. But when you start to digging into some of this, you find some interesting alternative explanations. Noah was entire. He was full. He was intact. He was unblemished. He was without blemish. He was without defect. And notice that without defect is the most translated way. 36 times they translate this same word as without defect. What does that mean? Noah was without defect. So now, if you look at it again, Noah was a righteous man and without defect in his generation. Why is that important? Because Noah, in my opinion, is fully human. His wife is fully human, and their kids are fully human, and their kids' wives are fully human. Otherwise, the purpose of the flood is defeated by allowing someone with a Nephilim gene on the ark, which false teacher Rob Skiba says, that Ham's wife was on the ark with that Nephilim gene, which is going to taint 2/3 of humanity at minimum. Just by the Shemites mixing with the Hamites, everybody's going to become tainted. Again, that white male purity that he teaches disguised as Christian doctrine. So let's talk about it, the perfection of Noah. Again, if I'm wrong, I shouldn't find any evidence that there's a connection to this untainted Noah or free from blemish or without defect right here. So let's look into the book of Leviticus. I told you before, it's going to explain a lot of stuff from Exodus through 2 Samuel. And the Lord spake unto Moses. This is Leviticus 4:1-3. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which ought not to be done, and all do against any, and shall do against any of them, if the priest that is anointed to do sin according to the sin of the people, then let him bring for his sin, which he hath sinned, a young bullock without blemish unto the Lord for a sin offering. Without defect, without blemish, right? Same word, tamim. Leviticus 4:3, right here, 85:49, tamim. So I want you guys to see it, 85:49, 85:49. So now, he's supposed to bring a bull that is tamim. If this is reference to moral character, how can an animal be how can an animal be morally perfect? That doesn't make sense. How would you know if an animal has morals? How would you know what an animal's morals are? How would you know if an animal is morally perfect? This is referring to the bullock's physical appearance without blemish, tamim. So we have at least one example in the Bible to where it's referred to in the physical nature. And as I pointed out, it is the same exact word. I just want you guys to see 85:49 tamim, 85:49 tamim. So here it's translated as blameless, probably because the translators may not have had all of this in context. And here it is translated without blemish. So Noah was righteous morally and physically untainted or without blemish. Again, that's not proof, but I'm going to continue showing you. As we read the rest of Genesis, we see that something is wrong with the flesh. Remember, God is already going to destroy all the birds, the beasts, the animals, the people, everything. Then we see an indication that Noah is physically perfect. We saw in the book of Jasher that they were tampering with all flesh. Let me see the earth. Let's see. Let's go back to Genesis 6:11. Let me not get ahead of myself. Genesis 6:11 through 13. Yeah, we're not going to read the instructions for the ark. Genesis 11-13. The earth also was corrupt before God, that the word of corrupt again, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. What did it say? They started to eat mankind. The earth was filled with violence. All flesh had corrupted its way. Again, how do animals become corrupt? Let's go over here and look at these words. This is the word corrupt, 78:43, 78:43. The word corrupt, 78:43, shakath. Just to make sure we're on the same page, corrupt, 78:43, corrupted, 78:43, perhaps to go to ruin. All flesh had went to ruin. How is that possible? How did the animal flesh go to ruin? You go down here, read some of these words, corrupted, destroyed. Let's come over here, ruin, jeopardized, laid waste, polluted, spoiled, ravaged. All flesh had become ravaged and spoiled and polluted and destroyed and jeopardized and harmed right here. All flesh had gone to ruin. How is this possible? Now we get to the book of Jasher. I kept saying we saw in the book of Jasher, but now we're going to see in the book of Jasher, which again, I do not use as scripture, but I use as historical reference because the book of Jasher gives us more insight. It builds upon everything we've learned from the book of Enoch and from the book of Jubilees and from other parts of the Bible we read. Jasher tells us what was happening, the details, how all flesh became corrupted. And here, before we get into Jasher, you see Medusa. It's a woman with snakes in her hair. Sometimes she's depicted with a snake's body, sometimes not. But she was a Gorgon in mythology. She was a hybrid. Now, Jasher chapter 4, verses 16 through 21 is going to tell us a little bit more detail. And all the sons of men departed. Now, before I start, Jasher does interpret the sons of God as humans. It does interpret the Nephilim as judges and rulers. It does not interpret them as supernatural means. That's where it disagrees with everything. However, everything else in Jasher, except for the interpretation of who was what, agrees with everything else that we've seen so far. So, and all the sons of men departed from the ways of the Lord in those days, as they multiplied upon the face of the earth with sons and daughters. And they taught one another their evil practices, and they continued sinning against the Lord. Now, in the book of Enoch, it says some Yahs and the angels came down and taught men these evil practices, and then the men did them. So there is not really necessarily a contradiction, because the men did do those practices, but they were taught those practices from the angels, according to Enoch. And every man made unto himself a god, and they robbed and plundered every man his neighbor as well as his relative, and they corrupted the earth, and the earth was filled with violence. Okay, so the earth was corrupted. And it says, and their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men and took their wives by force from their husbands according to their choice. They took wives of all which they chose. Here it says judges and rulers, but the Bible says the sons of God, the angels, did this. They took them all wives of which they chose. This one says they took them from other men by force. And the sons of men in those days took from cattle of the earth, the beast of the field, and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixtures of animals of one species with another. Didn't Jubilee say everything had corrupted their order? In the Bible, it says all flesh has been corrupted. All flesh has been polluted, ravaged, ruined. Corrupted right here. Ravaged, ruined. All flesh had been wasted. So this is where we find out what exactly they were doing. They were teaching they taught the mixture of animals of one species with another in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth, and it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth, all men and all animals. And the Lord said, I will blot out man that I created from the face of the earth, yea, from man to the birds of the air, together with cattle and beasts that are in the field, for I repent that I made them.
All things are full of labor, man cannot utter it.
The destroyer has returned.
I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.
Earth's magnetosphere is continuing to fail the Earth at an alarming rate, with seemingly no end in sight.
The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun.
Men forget the days of the destroyer. Only the wise know where it went, and that it will return to its appointed hour. It raged across the heavens in the days of wrath, and this was its likeness. It was a billowing cloud of smoke enwrapped in a ruddy glow, not distinguishable in joint or limb. Its mouth was an abyss from which came flame, smoke, and hot cinders. When ages pass, certain laws operate upon the stars in the heavens. Their ways change. There is movement and restlessness. They are no longer constant, and a great light appears redly in the skies. When blood drops upon the earth, the destroyer will appear, and mountains will open up and belch forth fire and ashes. Trees will be destroyed, and all living things engulfed.
The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun.
So all the flesh had been corrupted because they started to mix these species with one another. Remember, keep that in the back of your mind. All of this is going to be consistent. This is why we need to know the days of Noah. So let's talk about some of the corruption that was going on. Here we see a centaur, we see these horse-human hybrids, and we see a satyr. I almost said minotaur, but we have a satyr, a goat-human hybrid, and the minotaurs were bull-human hybrids. So we see these human hybrids, and we see this, and we say, oh, that's mythology. That stuff didn't exist. But again, go back to St. Augustine. Augustine was a Catholic under penalty of death, and he still said, this is happening. These things are real. It's going on right now in my day. And it would be foolish to deny that this is happening. He calls anybody denying it a fool. But real quick, so we have this right here. We have, again, I want to show you Medusa again. We have a hybrid woman with snakes in her hair. We have a centaur mixed with a man mixed with horse. We have the satyr, a man mixed with a goat. We have the minotaurs, a man mixed with a bull. And it says right here, they taught the mixture of animals of one species with another in order therewith to provoke the Lord. So let's talk about satyrs in the Bible. So I had a debate, and the link is in the description. The debate I had on the days of Noah with Brother Matthias, and he does agree with me on a lot of stuff, including the fact that Israelites are black. And so he asked me to do a team debate with him a while back, and I did. And we debated the Nephilim and the days of Noah. And you will find that the other two guys had already made up their mind what they wanted to believe, and no matter what evidence, they tried to twist it in a way that benefited them. But in one part of the conversation, one of the guys says, well, satyrs are mythology. That's not in the Bible. Satyrs are not in the Bible. And I said, yes, they are. And I had him turn to Isaiah 13. And here's why this is important. Again, I told you I was going to tie this to what's going on in today's time. Now, in Isaiah 13, it's talking about the fall of Babylon. This is a reference to the end times kingdom, for those that don't know. And so we talked about the satyrs here, the fall of Babylon. Isaiah 13, we're going to look at verse 19 through 22. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. Neither shall the Arabian pitch their tent there, neither shall the shepherd make their fold there. And wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there. And the wild beasts of the island shall cry in their desolate houses, and dragons in their pleasant places, and her time is near to come, and her days shall not be prolonged. Dragons is an interesting reference. I personally believe dragons are hybrid creatures mixed with a lot of stuff. I don't believe that they were mythological 100%. They may not have been those big fire-breathing winged creatures that we see, but there are depictions. Let me see if I can go back to it real quick. I think we passed it. If we did not pass it, I will. All right. We didn't pass it. All right. So it's coming up. I'll show you guys in a second. All right. So we're going to go back through all this. Anyway, so the satyrs are my point. I didn't want to get sidetracked anyway. All right. So the satyrs are my point here. Here we go. So the satyrs are my point. The satyrs are goat-human hybrids. So during this debate, I bring up the satyrs. So now he's proven wrong because he's already said satyrs aren't in the Bible. And I said, yes, they are. And I showed him satyrs in the Bible, 2 places. It's Isaiah 13 and I believe Isaiah 22. I have to go check that out. But I didn't want to pull up all those because I can make my point with one reference. But especially this Babylon reference. Because this Babylon reference is going to come up again. Remember, if your doctrine is based in truth, there's going to be consistency. So look at the word satyr here. We have wild goats. This is 8163 Serene. It says it's translated as wild goats. 8163 Sa'ir. It's going to be, the definition is hairy. However, when you go deeper, when you dig deeper, satyrs in the Bible, you will find that in the Brown Driver Briggs, it equates satyr with demons, which made me start to dig a little bit more. And you will find that the Sa'ir, the fearful ones, the hairy ones, are mentioned all throughout the Old Testament and is translated as devils at some points. It's not always translated as satyrs. Sometimes it's translated as devils or demon, which is why they associated with a demon. But if you come down here, and if you listen to the debate, you will see that as they started reading this part, they latched on to a point that they wanted, and they will repeat it. He says, he-goat, by analogy, a fawn, devil. And he stops and he goes, a fawn, that's what it is, a baby deer, a fawn. And I said, look up the word fawn and make sure you spell it as presented there, F-A-U-N. They did not want to do that. They kept saying a fawn, a baby deer. And you'll hear that in the debate. Now, if you Google fawn, it tells you one of a class of lustful rural gods represented as a man with a goat's horns, ears, legs, and tail. Fawn is sometimes confused with fawn, F-A-W-N, which is what they were talking about. But they had already made up their mind that they wanted to believe that this stuff wasn't real. And so they didn't do any actual research. They latched onto a word, made up their own definition for the word, because as you can see, this is not the definition of this kind of fawn. And they said, yeah, that's what it is. It's a fawn. Yes, that's exactly what I was telling you. And in their mind, they had just proven that the satyr, the mythological mention of the satyr was nothing more than a baby deer. And that's not true. And you guys can go check out the debate. The link's in the description right here and from Wikipedia. Now, this definition is from Oxford, the Oxford Dictionary. This is from Wikipedia. The faun is a mythological half-human, half-goat creature appearing in ancient Rome. The goat man, more commonly affiliated with the satyrs of Greek mythology than the fauns of Roman, are bipedal. So we have these creatures mentioned in the book of Isaiah. We see they are associated with demons. This is going to come back up. So they'll say, well, aren't you just trying to use the Bible to justify a belief in mythology? I've had people ask me this many times because they don't understand, because their pastor has not taught them this. Their camp leader has not taught them this. This is not something that they've discussed, and so they don't understand how this is applicable and why this is not mythology. This is biblical and modern.
According to the Book of Enoch, 200 angels descended upon Ardis, which is the top of Mount Armon today, known as Mount Hermon, which is located on the border between Lebanon and Syria. The Book of Enoch 7:7. Then they swore all together, and all bound themselves by mutual execrations. Their whole number was 200, who descended upon Ardis, which is the top of Mount Armon. The Book of Enoch 7:10-15. Then they took wives, each choosing for himself, whom they began to approach, and with whom they cohabitated, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and the dividing of roots and trees. And the woman conceiving brought forth giants, whose stature was each 300 cubits. These devoured all which the labor of men produced, until it became impossible to feed them, when they turned themselves against men, in order to devour them, and began to injure birds, beasts, reptiles, and fishes, to eat their flesh one after another, and to drink their blood. Then the earth reproved the unrighteous. The Hebrew word for giant is Nephil, from Nephal, properly a feller, example, a bully or tyrant. Giant. There are 3 races that came forth from the fallen angels: the giants, which are the Nephilim, the Nephil, which are the children of the giants, and the Eliud, or Eljo, which are the children of the Nephil. Jubilees 7:21-22. For owing to these 3 things came the flood upon the earth, namely, owing to the fornication wherein the watchers against the law of their ordinances went a-whoring after the daughters of men, and took themselves wives of all which they chose. And they made the beginning of uncleanliness, and they begat sons, the Nephilim, and they were all unlike, and they devoured one another. And the giants slew the Nephil, and the Nephil slew the Eljo, and the Eljo mankind, and one man another.
Most people believe that the giants were all destroyed in the flood, and that the fallen angels were all bound in everlasting chains. This is true as it relates to the first fallen angels and giants. But we must keep in mind that there were giants after the flood that dwelt in the land of Canaan. Where did these new race of giants come from? If the first giants came of fallen angels, and the original fallen angels were bound unto judgment, we can only conclude that they must have come from a new generation of fallen angels. They continue to come down and take the daughters of men as wives and bear children unto them.
And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. The Emims dwelt therein in times past, a people great and many, and tall as the Anakims, which also were accounted giants as the Anakims, but the Moabites call them Emims. For only Og king of Bashan remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. Is it not in Rabbath of the children of Ammon? 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man.
The Book of Enoch 7:11-12. And the women conceiving brought forth giants, whose stature was each 300 cubits. These devoured all which the labor of men produced, until it became impossible to feed them. Most Christians try to discredit the Book of Enoch based on the passage that says the giants were 300 cubits tall, which makes the giants around 450 feet. That's pretty incredible, and seems to be questionable. The scribes and translators must have made an error, and the actual text could have read 30 cubits instead of 300, making the giants about 45 feet tall, which is in accordance to some of the remains being found.
I find it strange that Christians are willing to discredit the Book of Enoch based on a couple of errors, but the King James Version has hundreds of such errors, not to mention Christianity itself is full of errors.
The Book of Enoch, it's one of those that's accepted by some and rejected by others. It is a very controversial book because it raises a lot of questions about the identity of certain racial groups, and it brings greater understanding to many of the mystical things that are greatly misunderstood today. You have the question of the giants, the spirits that roam the earth, the elements of end-time prophecy, and so much more that are very difficult to simply just dismiss because there's just too much starting to make sense as certain events unfold.
Most authors have not taken into account that this Nephilim and their children the Eliud could reproduce. This explains some of the strangeness of ancient mythology. Moreover, perhaps were humanoids, such as the Neanderthals came from, and why they are not of the same DNA branch as modern humans out of Africa. However, Neanderthals were not the only hominin species that humans mated with. According to a new study, East Asian and European populations share genes with the Neanderthal. Also, East Asians share genes with the mysterious archaic hominin species that lived in Siberia, the Denisovians, that are close cousin to the Neanderthal.
For hundreds of years, many have tried to explain away the existence of aliens, demons, and fallen angels. It has been labeled as fiction, the stuff that movies are created from. But now, even science has uncovered some astounding facts that are baffling the minds of people all over the world. The fact that there are 145 alien genes discovered by modern scientists that claim that some DNA is not from earthly ancestors should be enough to cause us to rethink things that we label as fiction. In the May 2011 edition of the Discover magazine, titled "You Are Not Human," referring to the Asian and Caucasian race in an article titled "Meet the New Human Family," states that there were times when more than one species shared our planet. The article also states that anatomically modern humans interbred with Neanderthals in the Middle East before they populated Europe and Asia. Scientists are now saying that the Neanderthal gene is only present in the Asian and Caucasian, not in the African, and that when the Africans migrated out of Africa, they mated with something else. The question we should be asking is, where did the Neanderthal come from? Did the humankind truly evolve from apes? Did Asians and Caucasians come from the mixing of the seed of the fallen angels? Are there aliens among us? Where has this strange DNA come from? Are the demons and aliens that many claim to have seen the same entity? Lastly, Where do the fallen angels spoken of in the Bible fit into all of this?
So let's talk about modern science. If this is all mythology, as the days of Noah were, so if I'm right, we should be able to find this. If I'm wrong, we shouldn't be able to find this in modern times. If everybody else is right about the sons of God being the sons of Seth, we should be able to find the sons of Seth mixing with the daughters of Cain right now. But we can't because they were killed in the flood. But we saw that they were mixing species as well. So far, the outside sources have told us that they were mixing species. The Bible tells us everything had become corrupt, all flesh. All flesh. Remember, all flesh is not the same flesh. There's different kind of man, birds, fish, beast, everything. Different kinds of flesh. All flesh had become corrupt because they were mixing it. So here in the 1920s, we see a humanzi. The humanzi is a hypothetical chimpanzee-human hybrid. An unsuccessful attempt to create such a hybrid was made by Aya Ivanovich Ivanov in the 1920s. The portmanteau word humanzi for a human-chimpanzee hybrid appears to have entered usage in the 1980s. Now, if the video is still out there on YouTube, I will go look for it and add it to the description. But Jesse Ventura, his show Conspiracy Theory, he does a episode on the humanzi. And it was the first time I had heard of it. And during the episode, he found evidence that the humanzi was not a failed experiment. Some of the experiments failed, but he found evidence that they succeeded in some of them. And so he goes to a location which is rumored to have a humanzi, and it's supposed to be a privately owned company, and he's met with armed guards, government guards. So something else is going on there. You guys can watch that episode of Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura on your own, where he investigates the humanzi. But it'd be one thing if this was the only example. We have from 2003, the Washington Post, cloning yields human rabbit hybrid embryo. I Googled human rabbit hybrid because I had wrote about it in the days of Noah. You get 28 million results if you Google human rabbit hybrid. Human pig hybrid created in the lab. This is from National Geographic. Here are the facts. This is 2017. 2019, Japan approves first human animal embryo experiments. This is from nature.com. And again, from 2003, human rabbit human embryos reported. Chinese scientists mixed DNA. Here's another article. All these articles the links are in the description. First human monkey hybrid embryo was created in China. This is 2019, August 13th. Now, it's funny. It's almost 16 years to the date. This is the 13th, this is the 14th.
And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast.
It was of them creeping clouds, the fowls of the air.
It's a lion,
Repent
a snake
that I
for a
have
tail,
made
and a goat's head.
But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord.
From which came
These are the
flame,
generations of Noah.
smoke,
Noah
and
was a
hot
just
cinders.
man and perfect in his generation.
Everything I'm saying that was happening in the days of Noah is happening right now. That's not deniable. They're mixing creatures right now.
The earth
Behold,
also
all flesh
was
has become
corrupt
corrupt.
before God.
And
The
you
earth was filled
need
with
a
violence.
organ transplant. And there are no
looked upon
human
the earth,
organs available, and
behold,
yet
it
there
was
are
corrupt,
thousands
for all
upon
flesh
thousands
corrupted his
of
way
organs
upon the
available
earth.
that have been grown in pigs.
God said unto Noah,
Is
the
that
end of all flesh
breaking
is
God's
near.
law to have something that's part pig put in you to save your life?